Who is Donald Hollowell, and how did he impact the civil rights movement during the 1960s to 1970? Donald Hollowell impacted the civil rights movement by striving for racial equity in the courts, working to desegregate schools, and helping to provide opportunities and employment for black people. Donald Hollowell grew up during the Great Depression. His family suffered economically, and in order to provide for his family, Donald Hollowell joined the Army as part of the segregated 10th Cavalry Regiment, better known as the Buffalo Soldiers. During his time serving, he experienced institutionalized racism and lived through the policies of Jim Crow laws, as well as having grown up in the South with the heavy presence of racism and segregation. Nonetheless, during his service, he got his high school diploma and later withdrew from the Army to focus on his education, but was called to service in 1941 to fight in World War II, where he met his wife, Louise Thornton. He enrolled in a law school at Loyola University in Chicago, Illinois, where he earned his law degree in 1951. In 1954, a huge Supreme Court case took place, Brown v. Board, which declared the segregation of schools to be unconstitutional. Hollowell worked to help desegregate schools in the South as an attorney and uphold this Supreme Court decision. Hollowell was a lawyer for the NAACP, the chief lawyer in defense of civil rights protesters in Georgia. His first big successful case was in 1959, where he represented two black applicants, Hamilton Holmes and Charlene Hunter, to the University of Georgia that claimed to have been denied admission on the basis of race, in the court case known as Holmes v. Danner. In the end, he managed to dismantle his opponent's arguments and prove to the court that the University of Georgia did deny these two applicants on the basis of race. The judge forced the school to admit the two students, and because of Hollowell, the School of Georgia was effectively desegregated. Another thing that Hollowell worked to fix was a school desegregation plan labeled the Atlanta Plan. He expresses his discontent for the plan's mention of deliberate speed in terms of implementing the plan to desegregate schools, as it lacked time frame and motion to desegregate these southern schools as quickly as possible. Because of this, he demonstrated his true commitment to not only working to end school segregation as required by law, but also to do it swiftly in order to bring about justice to all those discriminated against by segregationist policies still implemented in the South. During Kennedy's presidency, there was a large rise in civil rights protests like the March on Washington led by Martin Luther King Jr., protests in Birmingham, and sit-ins at Atlanta. Because of the Atlanta sit-ins, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested and called Hollowell to represent him in court. Thanks to Hollowell, those charges were dropped. But later, Martin Luther King was charged again because he violated a simple traffic law for the second time. His sentence was 4 months of hard labor as part of a chain gang. Hollowell wanted to get this case thrown out, but when Hollowell went to retrieve Martin Luther King from prison, he found that Martin Luther King had already been taken from the Atlanta prison and driven to Reedsdale prison. His friend Andrew Young describes his night like this.
That was the worst night of Martin Luther King's life. They took him from the DeKalb County, put him in leg irons and handcuffs, laid him on the floor in the back of a paddy wagon with nobody back there but a German Shepherd. And they drove him from Atlanta to Reedsville. That's 300 miles. There were no expressways then. 300 miles on bad Georgia roads.
Nonetheless, Hollowell remains calm. He gives this speech to the media.
You have asked me what other plans do we have in connection with Reverend Martin Luther King's release. Of course, this would depend upon whether or not the court granted our motion to vacate the order of yesterday. If the court fails to release him, of course, we would take other steps to appeal.
Hollowell worked to get Martin Luther King back from the jail and in the end got this sentence appealed as well. The treatment of Martin Luther King Jr. and his sentencing were far too harsh for the crimes committed, the crime simply being the traffic violations. This speaks on the favoritism towards the white race present in the judicial system. Another case Hollowell accepted was that of a 15-year-old boy named Preston Cobb, who had been tried and convicted of murder within 24 hours. His sentence was execution. 5 days before the execution was set to happen, Hollowell took his case.
If a new trial should be granted, are you hoping for a complete acquittal of it, or would you be satisfied with a life sentence instead of a death sentence?
Well, of course, according to the conventions that we are making, the boy is contending that he did not do it, and certainly we would not want our man to get any time for that which he did not do, if in fact this is what the evidence ultimately proves out.
Through a series of court cases, he was convicted, but this time only to life in prison. But 7 years later, he was released from prison. The mercilessness established by the court, convicting a 15-year-old boy to death so quickly, is another example of the racial prejudice present in the courts that Hollowell spent fighting during his time as a lawyer. Hollowell played a key role in representing black people in courts down in the South where prejudice and injustice, both in and out of the judicial system, ran high. President Lyndon B. Johnson was a big turning point for civil rights legislation. Among other things, he established the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission in 1956, or the EEOC for short. This federal agency worked to enforce laws against discrimination in the workplace. Hollowell speaks of how important this commission is to the people in America and the commission's ability to truly understand and look into the lives of the people in order to make a difference. Donald Hollowell was the regional director of this federal agency and helped change employment opportunities for many black Americans. Hollowell was a very impactful figure in the civil rights movement, working hard to end discrimination on the courts and in the courts, helping to desegregate schools in the South, like the University of Georgia, and helping to rid discrimination in employment as part of the EEOC.